There was, as it transpired, nothing so hazardous to civic decorum in Flaxborough as a new acquisition, especially if it shone. At precisely 10:45, during the quarterly unveiling of the municipal hall's fresh amenities, Mrs. Gorringe tugged at the dustcloth with a theatrical flourish, catching not only the eye, but also, regrettably, the heel of the deputy mayor. The cloth slid, the crowd gasped, and a monstrous, gleaming tea-urn stood revealed, proud, misaligned, and most undiplomatically spilling a damp stain across the parquet. "That's leaking!" I saw it nearly soak Councillor Mosley's brogues. He tripped, not ran. These floors haven't seen polish since the last election. Pinnock's Hardware fitted it, I'm sure. Never trust a man who whistles with his teeth. If it's municipal property, it'll drip like the town clock. Was it supposed to be switched on already? Smells like old socks. As the babble frothed over, Inspector Purbright appeared at the periphery, gently navigating a path between startled committee women and the stone-faced verger, who seemed determined to defend the urn's honour with his silhouette alone. Purbright's gaze lingered not on the liquid or the gathered indignity, but on a single odd detail, the price tag, ostentatiously clipped and hanging at an angle beneath the tap, bearing the faded inked total £38, but with the final digit blotted out. Sergeant Love, earnest and wrestling a mop, blundered in and nearly collided with the local press, who had arrived with pencils sharpened for scandal. Above the din, Purbright murmured, "Well, it's not the kind of welcome one expects for freshly boiled water," and his eyebrows traced a line that in certain circles passed for wit. The crowd boiled far more vigorously than the urn, piecing together blame for a favourite pastime among those deprived of afternoon tea. A hush fell as Mrs. Gorringe discovered beneath the tablecloth a folded scrap of stationery marked "Withdraw immediately." The handwriting was slanted, unmistakably purposeful, and not in the least suited to invitations. Gossip sidled in for a second round, the press closed in, and Purbright, having pocketed his notebook, surveyed the shiny instrument with an air of mild resignation. Then Councillor Mosley, after several minutes of strategic toe-dabbing, let forth a little yelp and brandished something retrieved from the public side of the urn. It was a small, pink carnation, flattened and quite out of place in a vessel meant for civic refreshment. "Who put that there?" barked the verger, no longer gentle. But even the least attentive in the room could see it was not a question meant for an answer. Inspector Purbright stooped, smiled, and watched as the carnation drew the collective gaze away from the leaking urn to a fresh, less explicable enigma. Someone, it seemed, had staged a scene, and perhaps it was not the tea-urn that would serve as the afternoon's truest scandal. As the municipal hall resounded with interrogations and the crowd began to scatter their suspicions like breadcrumbs, Sergeant Love leaned in, voice low. "Do you suppose, sir, it's a warning?" Purbright looked thoughtfully at the flower, then at the scrap of stationery. "That," he said, as if speaking to the carnation itself, "rather depends upon whom it was meant for." The door to the mayor's office rattled, and a brief, panicked face peered round it before vanishing a glimpse everyone witnessed, yet no one acknowledged fully. At that moment, the parish hymn-board in the adjoining room switched, unbidden, from Peace Everlasting to Rescue the Perishing. The organ wheezed to life and hissed through an otherwise silent moment. And in Flaxborough, where scandal preferred to arrive with tea, all present felt the chill, wondering whose rescue or whose peril would matter most. Flaxborough's morning news, suspect at the best of times, thundered with more authority than usual, courtesy of Mrs. Gorringe's urgent telephoning to half the committee and the pressman's extravagant scribbling at the scandalous unveiling. By noon, every tradesman, housewife, and retired civil servant had their own theory. Some questioned the capacity of Pinnock's Hardware Some blamed a vendetta between the Ladies' Guild and the mayor's office, and at least two, having watched the carnation exchange hands, wondered softly if romance was at the root of civic disarray. Inspector Purbright walked the market square with the measured tread of a man unperturbed by drama but attuned to its nuances. Sergeant Love, not far behind and still wielding a mop, trailed with awkward loyalty. Their progress, though outwardly placid, was observed by several townsfolk from behind the cross-hatched glass of the Butterwick's bakery, whose custard tarts bore little resemblance to the truth emerging about the tea-urn. Purbright's first call was to Pinnock's hardware, venturing into the cool dark of the shop, where Mr. Pinnock himself, a man of considerable nose and negligible appliance expertise, waited behind a counter encumbered by spare plugs and fuses. Purbright's greeting, gentle and diplomatic, delivered just enough civility to encourage a flood of recollections. "Oh, it's not our doing, Inspector, truly not," Pinnock declared, eyes wide and voice wobbling just above the till's nervous ringing. "We supplied the urn, yes, but the delivery, well, the council insisted upon extra capacity for the municipal tea, you see. Not my fault if they're boiling over more than civility at those meetings." Purbright, hands folded, glanced at a faint, muddy shoe mark beneath the counter, matching, so it seemed, the scuff on the hall's new floor. "A curious choice of carnation, Mr. Pinnock," he remarked, producing the pink, flattened flower with a motion practiced for uncovering small, domestic truths. Pinnock blinked. "Carnation? Wouldn't you know? Inspector Florals are Mrs. Pinnock's province. Never dare to set
foot in her garden. If I want peace, I buy artificial." He leaned forward, hopeful. "You're not here about the price tag, are you? Council, always pinching, always haggling. That urn was meant to be £38 and 25 pence, you know. Someone's clipped it for reasons unknown unless they're hiding the V." Purbright's smile was polite, but his interest remained on the mention of clipped price tags. Pinnock fidgeted, then, after a theatrical sigh, admitted, "It's not the first odd thing last week. Someone returned a kettle without its receipt, blamed the guild, and paid in £1 notes, every one marked with a daisy." Sergeant Love nodded sagely, then asked on cue, "Would you say there are many flower connections among the council, sir?" "Flower feuds, more like," Pinnock croaked, glancing at the calendar, which featured bluebells for April despite being September. "Mrs. Gorridge loathes carnations and hates pink. She's for roses, she always was." Their interview concluded, and Purbright noted a basket of carnations resting on a crate at the shop's back, labelled "For delivery to Church Hall, attention verger." He made a mental connection, but as was his habit, kept his deductions under wraps. Walking back to the municipal hall, Love whispered, "Do you reckon it's sabotage, sir? Only I overheard Mr. Crabtree at the post office say someone switched hymn numbers on purpose." Purbright allowed that Crabtree, as the most ambitious of Flaxborough's part-time organists, might know a thing or two about mischief, but suggested careful observation, not precipitate action. At the hall, townsfolk gathered in clusters, some still aggrieved, others conspiratorially hopeful, and the rest simply watching for movement. The verger, Mr. Brindle, hovered near the door, his thick fingers tapping nervously against the hymn-board reset to peace everlasting. He intercepted Purbright and Love with the ceremonial gravity reserved for unwelcome occasions. "Can't have council meetings with leaking urns or floral messages, sir," Brindle offered, voice pitched for authority. "It's the outsiders, I say. Someone knew about, someone fancy." "I saw a man by the side door earlier but didn't recognize him. Odd shoes, foreign, might matter." Purbright listened, noting Brindle's eagerness to blame a stranger, though locals rarely lacked for adversaries. He examined the hymn-board, spotted a dust smudge across the numbers, and ran his finger along its edge. Something A tiny slip of paper had lodged between everlasting and the adjacent slot for rescue the perishing. Purbright retrieved it, but made no public show. Love attempted to divert Brindle's certainty. Any peculiar happenings at choir practice, Mr. Brindle? Only I'm told the Ladies' Guild is planning a centenary bash with plenty of flower talk. The Brindle glowered. Flowers and hymns, it's all coded these days. Last week, Mrs. Gorridge said the lilies were a rebuke to her housekeeping, and Mrs. Fenwick
responded with azaleas at the altar. From the doorway, Councillor Mosley watched with the stance of a man ready to cast blame in any direction but his own. "Inspector," he called, and I demanded answers. Town property defaced, secrets slipped under municipal tables. "What's your next move?" Purbright, pausing at the step, smiled blandly. "For now, Councillor, it would seem prudent to ask after all our blossoms before we try boiling the water again." Later, at the Rose and Crown pub, gossip redoubled over pints and sandwiches, blending flower theory with municipal complaint. Mrs. Fenwick, herself not above stirring, wondered aloud if the carnation meant a council romance. Perhaps Mr. Brindle was courting Mrs. Gorridge. A regular named Tibbet insisted it was a protest against substandard tea. Someone whose identity was obscured by steam claimed the carnation matched those on the mayor's hatband at last year's parade. Between sips, Purbright sat quietly in a corner, notebook at rest, listening as conversation wove a tapestry of suspects: the verger, the mayor, the hardware man, and any number of flower-wielding old guards. He noted who talked too much and who refused to talk at all. Love, ignoring a persistent pickle-fork hazard, leaned close. "If I may, sir, earlier," Mrs. Gorridge referred, below her breath, "to withdraw immediately," could mean money or something removed. Purbright inclined his head in approval by minimal motion, or perhaps something withheld until it is overlooked altogether. Hours passed. Flaxborough's concerns shifted from scandal to supper, yet anticipation hung heavier than the straining urn lid. As dusk settled over the town, a small commotion drew Purbright back toward the hall. Mrs. Gorridge emerged, speaking in crisp defensiveness, clutching her handbag as if it contained the town's hopes. She locked eyes with Purbright, then slipped a folded note into his hand. "For your investigation, Inspector. You'll want to read the back." He turned it over. The handwriting matched the carnation's slanted, direct, purposeful message. Just below, in faint blue pencil, a new line appeared: "Do not trust the flower arrangement." The clock tower struck 7. Behind its chimes, Purbright heard the quiet beginnings of a new, more personal scandal. The game, it seemed, was not about tea, or urns, or flowers, but what then? Evening cooled the market square, yet Flaxborough simmered with speculation. The shadows lengthened, drawing out talk and temper, blending the day's peculiarities into an uneasy anticipation that refused to settle. Inspector Purbright, returning from the Rose and Crown, passed shop windows aglow with after-hours commerce, behind which shopkeepers rearranged displays as if anxious to signal their innocence. Somewhere above, the council clerk's typewriter clattered more feverishly than town protocol demanded, drafting minutes of the morning's debacle with an air of revisionist zeal. Sergeant Love, a few steps behind, was still clutching his mop, though out of habit now rather than utility. At the hall's threshold, Mrs. Gorridge, having delivered her cryptic note, surveyed the square with the weary dignity of someone forced to defend both reputation and flower choice far too often for comfort. Inside, Purbright found Councillor Mosley and Mr. Brindle embroiled in a low, urgent argument, staking out new boundaries of innocence. Mosley's jacket creased with agitation. Brindle's voice trembled at the prospect of disorder in matters traditionally governed by order of service and sturdy brass. Between them, yesterday's scandal radiated a petty, insistent current. "Our tea functions have never seen such calumny," Brindle muttered, his fingers folded around a hymn book, knuckle white. "I blame the guild. Too much ambition, not enough tradition." Moseley, determined to distance himself from involvement, fixed Purbright with the expectant gaze of one who knows their innocence will surely require proof. "You'll want to examine the committee's accounts, payments for urns, floral arrangements, every last pound. I'll fetch the treasurer's ledger, if she's not already had it away." Before Purbright could reply, the door banged softly open, and Mr. Crabtree, part-time organist and full-time gossip enthusiast, hurried in. "Inspector, you must come to the vestry straight away. Something odd happened with the flowers. Again." Almost apologetically, Purbright excused himself. Love in tow. In the vestry, the ladies' guild was gathered. Mrs. Gorringe led the assembly, her expression denying any complicity, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Against the wall, a cluster of carnations identical to the one found at the runway scattered. Beneath them, an upturned vase trickled water onto a paper doily, soaking letters that spelled "Welcome Flaxborough." Mrs. Fenwick, rising to authority, hissed, "We left these intact in the morning, Inspector." Someone interfered. "This," she gestured to the damp arrangement, "is a deliberate provocation." Love, earnest as ever, asked, "Would anyone have cause to upend the guild's arrangement, ma'am?" Mrs. Gorringe glared at Mrs. Fenwick, whose lips pursed imperiously. "It's been a contentious centenary, not all like my choice of pink. Some prefer white, but sabotage, that's new." From the hallway, a frisson of laughter escaped a pair of public works clerks who, watching the investigation unfold, exchanged whispers. "Probably Crabtree again," one murmured. "He blamed the flower show mix-up last year on the vicar's eyesight." Purbright knelt, inspecting the soaked doily, eyes narrowed at the faint blue pencil scribble evident now in the margins. "Withdraw, or the carnation returns." The threat was sharpened, decorative and precise as civic malice. He moved aside a petal, revealing a second fragment of card. The handwriting matched that of Mrs. Gorringe's first note. The inspector regarded Love, who had leaned over with earnest intent. "Sir, could it be extortion? Or perhaps just vindictive gardening?" Love surmised, glancing between suspects with grave uncertainty. "Very little in Flaxborough is grown without reason," Purbright said quietly, pocketing the card. The guild's members were reluctant to respond, but Mrs. Fenwick, her voice now brittle with conviction, volunteered. Last year's flower festival ended with Mrs. Gorringe threatening to resign over a disputed cup. The carnation arrangement was supposed to mark peace. Apparently peace is more disruptive than war. A snort rose from Mrs. Butterwick, who sold buns by the dozen and opinions by the gross. "There are old wounds here, Inspector. Nothing a bit of tea and respect wouldn't soothe, except there's less of one and none of the other." Purbright fixed on the logic behind the flower motif. If carnations signified peace or a truce, their sudden appearance, especially flat, pink and obvious, suggested a deliberate violation. The inspector turned to Mrs. Gorringe, now seating herself with knotted hands. "Would anyone wish you withdrew?" he asked, level and conversational. She bristled. Any number since the guild went to ballots over napkin colours, but only one would send carnations to Mrs. Fenwick. Her gaze darkened, yet Mrs. Fenwick did not flinch. Outside, a ripple of inconspicuous commotion interrupted proceedings. Gossip, unchained, had discovered a new event, the set piece that had traditionally punctuated the town's dramas. In the square, a pigeon much admired for its routine indifference to human enterprise had flown through an open council window and landed atop the much-maligned tea urn, dislodging the price tag. A crowd immediately gathered, magnifying the incident into proof of municipal conspiracy. "He's after breadcrumbs, not drama," murmured a regular, "but give Flaxborough half a chance, and even the birds get involved." Purbright joined the throng, retrieving the price tag now footmarked and bearing a curious alteration. Where the final digit had been blotted out, a fresh mark appeared, a small painted daisy in blue ink. It matched the earlier pound notes from Pinnock's recounted story. He pocketed it without comment, inviting the moment to ferment among the crowd's imagination. As the evening tiptoed past dinner, the inspector and Sergeant Love convened at the station's cramped office, a boxish relic positioned strategically between a postbox and a commemorative horse trough. Purbright read through guild meeting minutes, noting frequent references to withdrawal and non-standard arrangements, while Love drafted statements regarding the incidents involving the urn, the pigeon, and the persistent carnation motif. The station's telephone rang. Miss Checkley, council treasurer and reputation defender, was on the wire. "Inspector, regarding Mosley's request for the accounts, I've just discovered someone signed out the urn payment slip under a false name."
Not guild, not council, someone using initial CR, never seen handwriting like it. Purbright jotted a note. CR Crabtree's initials, or someone imitating them. He designed his next step with purposeful silence. A late visitor arrived, Mr. Pinnock, hardware merchant, clutching a handful of returned artificial flowers. "Just dropped off, Inspector." Odd little note attached. "For service, not sentiment. Not my handwriting, not Mrs. Pinnock's. Someone's distracting you, mark my words." Purbright considered flowers returned, price tags altered, and notes slipping from hand to hand. The investigation pressed forward, each event nudging the story's surface. In Flaxborough, insult rarely distinguished itself neatly from injury. Townsfolk drifted home, some burdened by new suspicions, others eager for tomorrow's revelations. No one took comfort from the restoration of the hymn board, nor the patched floor near the urn. The message, "Withdraw," and "Return the carnation," and the arrangement warned of intentions unresolved. Sergeant Love, ever literal, posed his theory. "Everyone's pointing fingers, sir, but the pigeon's the only thing that's moved anything so far." "Let's hope the town's motives prove more human," replied Purbright. And as the square emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps and a single blue ink daisy scrawled on a stray pound note in the hall's dustbin, Inspector Purbright slipped quietly from view, ideas collecting like leaves for the next disturbance. Morning crept into Flaxborough with unremarkable clarity. The previous day's events lingered like damp in the market square, hanging around the edges of every routine. In shop parlours, conversation glimmered with latent accusations, whispers about flowers, conspiracies about council money, and, for those inclined toward poetic logic, suspicions about the morality of tea itself. Mrs. Butterwick, master of the bun counter and rumour registry, had already reported to 3 customers that she'd personally seen Mrs. Gorridge counting carnations in the rain. At Municipal Hall, Purbright arrived quietly, a presence at once unassuming and decidedly out of place among the crescendo of anxious committee chairs. His stride was met by Councillor Mosley, clutching a bulging file with all the bravado he could muster after yesterday's embarrassment. Mosley, lips thinned by a night's worth of worry, thrust the file into Purbright's hands. "Here you are, Inspector. Every disbursement, every tea tray, and every floral invoice is itemized." The inspector thanked him gently, leafing through receipts whose florid notations seemed determined to be opaque. Penciled annotations flourished in the margins. Check rose order and reconcile tray total. Purbright, unhurried, nodded at a page listing a last-minute charge for artificial daisy set. Returned, no receipt. The signature, CR, curled in blue ink, matched the note Miss Checkley had flagged. Sergeant Love joined him in the committee room.
smelling faintly of disinfectant and municipal unease. "Sir, I've tried to audit the trays. Brindle swears he never saw a daisy on any, but Mrs. Gorridge says she did, and not just one. Says there was a row, like a warning." "Warnings in Flaxborough," said Purbright, paper rustling, "are usually reserved for disputes over jam quotas." While the committee fretted, the first set-piece event of the morning unfolded in full view of Flaxborough's assembled dignitaries. As Mrs. Gorridge commenced a tour of the refurbished kitchen, the new catering trolley's wheel, loose and ill-managed, spun away from its axle, upending a collection of ceramic tea trays loaded with precise carnations and white daisies. The flowers scattered, the trays skittered, and scalding water poured a trail toward the nearest accounts binder. The room exploded, not in panic, but in the kind of shrieking outrage reserved for the desecration of good china. The mayor, who had so far declined all involvement, swept in, hands flapping, voice high. "Stop the commotion. It's just a trolley. Who loaded daisies onto the trays? That's not guild protocol." Mrs. Gorridge, skirt bristling, declared, "Those aren't my daisies." "I never order white, but I know who does. Ask Mrs. Fenwick." Mrs. Fenwick, never one to accept a flower-based accusation, retorted, "Any fool could mix daisies and carnations, but it takes a special fool to do so in public." From the hallway came the piping voice of Mr. Crabtree. "Saw it myself, tray stacked high, someone fiddling about." Must have been one of the new volunteers, or perhaps not just overlooked. Still, it's odd to have flowers on kitchen equipment. Couldn't be more deliberate if you tried. Through the cascade of floral and ceramic disaster, Purbright moved methodically, inspecting each tray. His attention settled on one with a faint, greasy thumbprint and a clipped blue daisy, drawn not with affection, but with precision. From behind came a low gasp. Miss Checkley, holding the guild ledger, pointed at an entry for floral commissary unpicked. The purchase, paid in blue pencil pound notes, had been signed off by CR. "Sir," Love whispered, "it's as if someone wants every trace, every transaction, every flower to look connected, too connected." "Quite so," Purbright answered, "and when things align too neatly, suspicion follows." A hush settled over the room as Brindle, red-faced, clung to the hymn board, which now listed, "Work for the night is coming." Someone had altered it in the chaos, and Brindle, suddenly aware, relabeled it with practiced disgust. "Evening hymns in daylight. Flaxborough will have scandal at breakfast." The disruption had another consequence. The council housekeeper found beneath the toppled catering trolley a folded receipt for artificial flowers, white and pink urgent, time stamped before the unruly guild meeting and signed again, CR. The receipt, like the pile of blue pound notes, seemed both standard and staged. Feeling the press of rumour, Purbright assembled the witnesses, Mrs. Gorridge, Mrs. Fenwick, Brindle, Crabtree, and Councillor Moseley. His line of inquiry, measured yet pointed, unfolded as he weighed loyalty against self-interest. "Mrs. Gorridge, did you handle the catering trays this morning?" Her reply was clipped. "Only mine. The rest were to be done by Mrs. Fenwick and her volunteers." Fenwick bristled. "Volunteers, yes. But I checked every tray. No daisies. That's how I know it's sabotage." Crabtree, opportunistic, opined, "There's a certain finesse to floral sabotage, I'd say. Not all Pinner's volunteers would manage such neatness. Daisies on the ledger and pound notes suggest someone with council access." Moseley urged, "We mustn't let this disrupt the centenary plans. I move to suspend all floral arrangements until statements are taken." The witnesses dispersed with grumbling resentment. Some convinced guilt hovered over rivals. Others, certain innocence, only bred suspicion. Purbright, alone for a moment, studied the price tags, receipts, and the blue daisy motif appearing with unfailing regularity. Town gossip, meanwhile, spiraled into secondary speculation. Mrs. Butterwick, now fortified by mid-morning buns, confided to a customer, "All this fuss and broken crockery, if you ask me. Someone wants the council to look foolish with tea in trays. Last year it was biscuits. This year, flowers." Outside, beneath a soft drizzle, a weary postman retrieved a stack of letters addressed to all members of the guild. Each envelope bore, along with a municipal postmark, a small blue daisy in wax. The new scandal, it seemed, would be as much about communications as it was about flower arrangements. Back at the station, Sergeant Love drafted a list of daisy receipts, blue pound notes, catering mishaps, and volunteer access. Purbright endorsed it, then requested Love to interview the volunteers while he himself paid a visit to the treasurer's office. Miss Checkley was ready with another revelation. "Inspector, someone's been accessing council keys using my name. Yesterday, I was asked to account for a missing kitchen key. I never handled it." The sign-out slip is Blue Daisy again, initials CR. Purbright pocketed the newest clue. If one were to design a puzzle for municipal minds, this would be an admirable start. He returned to the hall, finding Crabtree regarding the hymnboard as if it were about to reveal its own secret. Love reported, "No volunteer matches CR, but one, Miss Rosenthal, is new to town. I arrived from Croxley. She prefers daisies, quiet, but always near the urn." Purbright jotted her name, aware the suspect pool had widened, motives convoluting with each tray, slip, and scribbled flower. The day closed with Flaxborough finally settling, or pretending to settle, about the muddled centenary, its council, and the guild and caterers newly wary of both urn and bloom. The inspector watched, waiting for another disturbance, knowing in Flaxborough peace was always a precursor to the next public disaster. Purbright's pen hovered over the name Miss Rosenthal, its ink pausing delicately between possibility and distraction. The morning's confusion at the hall had not fully abated, the trays stacked like evidence, the daisies multiplying in every corner, and Flaxborough's population divided into camps of "it was Mrs. Fenwick" and the smaller, more loyal battalion. Blame it on Brindle. No voice rose for Miss Rosenthal except her own, which, when heard, spoke less of flowers and more of careful, nervous order. Sergeant Love reported dutifully from the volunteer interviews. "Miss Rosenthal's not really integrated, sir. Keeps herself to herself, is very precise, and says she likes things neat. But if she's the type for sabotage, I'm a vicar. She's just new." He hesitated, assembling honesty. "She did say she offered to bring daisies for the guild. Thought it'd look cheerful. Mrs. Gorridge refused, saying pink was the rule and white was rebellion." As Love recounted the defensive logic of guild proceedings, Purbright added a note for cheerful rejects. Flaxborough, like its flowers, knew well how often sentiment was an alternative spelling for slight. Downstairs in the hall, Mrs. Fenwick marched with the air of a general defending a besieged border. Her voice rose above a chorus of stacked teacups. No one asked for extra flowers. "I haven't seen Miss Rosenthal do anything untoward. It's all Mrs. Gorridge's fussing. She's clever with arrangements, not so clever with peace." Love, approaching Fenwick with delicate caution, inquired about yesterday's carnation. "Was there any intention to upset Mrs. Gorridge, ma'am?" Fenwick sniffed. "Upset has been a regular visitor since the centenary planning began. If a flower can do more harm than a speech, perhaps we should hold our meetings in the greenhouse." She eyed him, not without mirth. "If Mossley has anything to say about it, the daisies will be taxed next." Rumour sprinted ahead of events as news of the catering disaster tumbled through the square. The pile of blue pound notes in the treasurer's office now drew the focus of every amateur sleuth, some suggesting forgeries as the root of Flaxborough's tea travails, others insisting that the floral confusion served as a cloak for some deeper, drier misdeed. At Butterwick's bakery, the preferred theory held firm. It's about reputation. Someone wants Mrs. Gorridge's outflowers or not. In the stairwell, Councillor Moseley made a tactical retreat to the kitchen, where he was ambushed by Crabtree, who brandished a torn diary page. The inspector found this stuck beneath the urn. Minute writing, initials CR, but not my hand. See for yourself. Mentions withdrawal again. If arrangements continue, resignation will follow. Purbright examined the page. The style echoed the other notes, but its haste spoke of pressure, not precision. "Did anyone see you take this, Mr. Crabtree?" Purbright said, his voice a mere suggestion. "No one, sir. I arrived early, could swear someone else was in the kitchen, but shadows aren't witnesses now, are they?" As midday approached, Purbright convened the relevant parties in the hall's main chamber. Mrs. Gorridge, Mrs. Fenwick, Brindle, Crabtree, Miss Rosenthal, and Moseley each sat at the council table, tea untouched, a decorous assembly with undertones of siege. Purbright produced the receipts, the tray evidence, and the various daisy-stamped notes. "As we have established," he said, "a voice designed for disarming someone wishes to disturb not only the routines but also reputations. Carnations and daisies are apparently the chosen arsenal. Yet money has changed hands, keys have been borrowed, and diary pages have been torn. What can we gather from this?" Telltale pauses thickened. Mrs. Gorridge's hand hovered near her cup, careful not to touch. Mrs. Fenwick's foot tapped a nervous code against the tiles. Brindle fingered the hymn-board, inspecting it for another sudden change. Crabtree, flushed with self-important discovery, blurted, "It's sabotage, but clever, not guild, not the council." Someone playing sides. Moseley, invoking the authority he liked to imagine belonged to him, declared, "The guild is at the heart of it. Too much autonomy, too little oversight." Rosenthal, pale and calm, spoke for the first time at length. "I came to Flaxborough to help. I joined the guild because I thought it'd be safe from this sort of thing. I like daisies because they're friendly. I never signed anything as CR, never bought artificial flowers. I only brought real ones." She folded her hands, waiting as if for a verdict. Purbright watched the table, weighing each hesitancy and careless quick denial. "Then it is necessary," he said quietly, "to question who benefits from the confusion and who does not." After tea, Sergeant Love wandered the square, soliciting off-the-record reflections. A weary shopkeeper muttered, "You want culprits? Look for those who make peace costlier than war." Mrs. Gorridge's pride is worth more than any urn. A council gardener confided that an order for a dozen pink carnations had been paid for twice, and one delivery was returned by mistake. Back at the station, Miss Checkley called. "Inspector Moseley's pressing for a guild audit, but I've found an overpayment in tea service double receipts, one marked CR." She sounded tired but determined. "It's not Mrs. Gorridge and it's not Fenwick. The signatures don't match." The handwriting's disguised. As the day dulled into mid-afternoon, gossip tightened its grip. A note was handed to Brindle by a child collecting hymn sheets. "Withdraw. The prize arrangement is in peril. Blue daisy again. Initials CR." The cadence of threat was unmistakable, yet the audience was still unsure who best fit the author's intent. At last, in committee, the mayor called for a vote of confidence. The guild, used to quick divisions, split along the expected lines. Half for Gorridge, half for Fenwick, and a lone vote for Rosenthal. The tally was predictable, but the tension was more that someone, it seemed, wanted a decision and would prod, threaten, and rearrange flowers until it arrived. Purbright lingered after the vote. He posed questions quietly. "Miss Rosenthal, were you the last to leave last night's guild meeting?" She shook her head. "No," Mrs. Fenwick locked up. "I was early today. I helped Mrs. Butterwick with trays." "Mrs. Fenwick, did you see anyone linger after you?" Fenwick pursed her lips. "Only Brindle. He's always last and loves a quiet hall." Brindle shrugged. "Last in, last out. But I don't leave flowers." Purbright made no adjudication. Instead, he departed with Sergeant Love to review the receipts, notes, and artificial flower orders with renewed care. That evening, Flaxborough wrestled with its new suspect, Miss Rosenthal, identified by proximity and by unfortunate taste in daisies. The town's story swelled with certainty that the outsider had upset the peace, the money, and the trays. Purbright withheld comment, letting opinion run its course. Love, troubled, watched the square for signals of change. In the deepening dusk, a single carnation appeared in the bakery window, its stem neatly clipped, its colour defiant pink. The flower seemed to wink at the town, promising that the mystery's next bloom would be no less unsettling. Evening descended, though Flaxborough's appetite for gossip remained undiminished. If anything, a day marinated in suspicion only fortified the townspeople's hunger for spectacle. And a spectacle, as if summoned by their collective longing, promptly arrived. Just as the hall's clock hand rested on 7, an hour considered neither late nor too early to expect further scandal, the Ladies' Guild gathered for what had optimistically been labelled Peaceful Arrangements Night. Mrs. Gorridge presided with evident tension. Even her necklace seemed to bristle with defensive pride. Mrs. Fenwick hovered near the window, scanning the fading light for adversaries real and imagined. Miss Rosenthal, relegated to the edge of the group, busied herself at the kettle, her hands folded as tightly as her lips. Sergeant Love waited in the vestibule, pen poised with hope for order, and an eye on every corridor where stray daisies might find themselves abandoned. Inspector Purbright, preferring surveillance in silence, sat at the back on a stacked chair, observing the subtle mechanics of loyalty, who shifted closer, who laughed too eagerly, and who let their gaze linger on the council tea urn as though it might once again decide to play villain. It was then that the second public mishap, true to Flaxborough's dramatic schedule, unfolded. The organ, usually dormant save for Sunday mornings and funerals, erupted with a ghastly, off-tempo rendering of Bringing in the Sheaves, not so much played as attacked. The hymnal selection, in no schedule, a favourite of no one, clashed wildly with the sombre mood. Everyone flinched. Even the most pragmatic were momentarily certain of sabotage. Mrs. Butterwick stepped out to investigate, only to report moments later that Mr. Crabtree, supposed to be in the vestry counting hymnals, had been found struggling both with a jammed pedal and a stack of hymn numbers now jumbled from their racks. "I only meant to tidy," Inspector Crabtree protested, appearing flustered, but the instrument was ready to spring. And would you look at this? From his pocket he produced a slip of paper decorated with a blue daisy upon which was typed, "Recall the tune," or "Recall the committee." This fresh communique was paraded before the guild, producing a chorus of speculations, accusations, and more than one snide remark about musical taste. The town's regulars, catching word of discord, pressed eagerly against leaded windows, eager for details that might flavour the pub talk richer than their whisky. The inspector collected the note, quietly setting it beside the other blue daisy threats. In the chaos he noticed Miss Rosenthal, silent but trembling. Love caught Purbright's eye, nearly mouthing, "She's taking it badly." As if on cue, Mrs. Fenwick declared with pointed sweetness, "There's music in every act, if not always harmony." Perhaps someone's played the wrong tune on purpose. Gossip's volume grew in the aftermath as suspects reassessed rivals. Mrs. Gorridge, voice measured, suggested the sabotage was beyond floral politics and undoubtedly meant to erode the guild from within, her gaze skating past Rosenthal but pausing long on Fenwick. Fenwick countered with arch dignity, "Not everyone's intent is civil war. Sometimes it's just poor musicianship." Mr. Brindle arrived to restore order, only to find the hymn board had once more been tampered with. Its slots now spelled out, "Guide me, O thou great Redeemer," but in anagrams resembling nothing quite so much as a cryptic crossword clue. This oddity fueled immediate suspicion, with Mrs. Butterwick muttering, "Well, if that doesn't have Fenwick written all over it, I'll eat my hat." And her scones. Meanwhile, Purbright subtly noted that the hand rewriting the board was not Brindle's, nor Fenwick's. In the confusion, Mrs. Gorringe drifted toward the kitchen, only to discover the guild's reserve of artificial flowers, white and pink both, had been replaced with a neatly coiled bundle of used hymn book ribbons, each one bearing the blue daisy stamp. Her shriek prompted a swift assembly, and the room's attention turned from musical farce to floral theft. Sergeant Love, heart pounding more from trying to impose order than from any true fear, summoned Moseley, who stormed in, visibly delighted by his invitation. "Another event sabotaged," he crowed. "Surely even Purbright sees a pattern. I propose a temporary suspension of Miss Rosenthal's guild privileges, at the very least until this chaos wilts." Rosenthal, stricken, could only protest, softly, "I've never taken anything, never altered a hymn board, never attacked an organ. Why would I?" While the majority prepared to assent out of fatigue or fear or genuine suspicion, Purbright paused, his eyes flitting to the table near the window, where, beneath a stack of hymn numbers, the faintest trace of blue ink marked the wood. He fingered it gently, observing that the daisy was formed from careful dots and practiced hands, not the trembling scrawl of nervous innocence. "My only concern," he said at last, "is that haste in judgment may suit our saboteur precisely. Suspicion can be useful for someone." His words went mostly unheeded as the guild voted narrowly to suspend Rosenthal until further notice. She left with downcast eyes, pauses trailing her path, while whispers swirled in her wake. Quiet ones are always crafty, and shouldn't have let outsiders near the tea. Mrs. Gorringe, feeling victorious, yet uneasy, announced, "Now let us restore order. No more distractions, no more music, and above all, no daisies or carnations are to leave the storeroom." Purbright looked on, analytic, as the guild descended into compensatory business. He made a mental note to return to the scene once tempers cooled. More pieces had been set in motion, motives now doubled back on themselves with every new mishap. Through the windows, the town, never more awake than at the scent of scandal, watched with rapt anticipation. Outside in the rain, Sergeant Love caught up with Miss Rosenthal on the steps. Her composure had fractured. She wiped at her cheeks, not quite furtively, and whispered, "I only wanted to help. It was never supposed to be so ugly," he said, with all the sincerity his bulk and blundering heart could manage. "It will come out right, miss." Inspector Purbright never gets wet in a storm, not even one with daisies. Settling in to write his evening notes, Love wrote, "Sabotage escalates. Miss Rosenthal accused, hymn board and flowers manipulated, motive for exclusion or division, true culprit unknown." In his own quiet study, Purbright sorted through slips of paper, blue daisies and council minutes, searching for the pattern not of the culprit's hand, but of their intention. In Flaxborough, harmony was always a fragile arrangement, sometimes only one note from collapse. By the next morning, Flaxborough felt almost spent, as if the drama of the tea urn, the flower arrangements, and the sabotage of its beloved hymns had left the town itself short of energy. Yet no small-town scandal goes unrefreshed for long. As the church clock chimed 9, rumours had already coalesced and split anew. Mrs. Butterwick swore on her jam-tart supply that the banished Miss Rosenthal was the victim, not the villain, citing her sorrowful posture and the state of her shoes. Others, especially the regulars at the Rose and Crown, argued that quiet guilt was the most insidious. Inspector Purbright began his day quietly, settling first in his office for an hour with the accumulated minute books and council receipts. He arranged them chronologically, looking for signs of divergent dates and numbers that fluttered out of sequence, names appearing when they ought not, and initials standing unsupervised in a line labelled expenses. Sergeant Love arrived bearing a fresh set of witness statements, his own mood weighted by empathy for Rosenthal and mingled confusion about the blue daisy motif, which now seemed to surface everywhere from treasurer's memos to anonymous tip-off letters. "Sir," Love said, poring over his notes, "the blue daisy keeps turning up. Council accounts, guild orders, even church flower rosters, and everyone who handles a receipt with one says they thought someone else ordered it." "Displacement of responsibility," Purbright murmured, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "A town-wide epidemic." Before they could organize a full inventory, Mrs. Fenwick arrived, harried and indignant. She announced loud enough for the entire building to hear, "My name is being slandered, Inspector. Someone claims I forged receipts for artificial flowers to embarrass Mrs. Gorridge. Impossible. I may gossip, but I do not counterfeit." As Purbright invited her to sit, Love glanced at the stack of blue daisy stamped invoices. "The volumes are odd, ma'am. More flowers than demanded, half returned, twice paid for." Mrs. Fenwick snorted. "Council bureaucracy at work." "If you wish to find theft, ask the treasurer about her own blotted ledger." Purbright marked that deflection as rapid, pointed, and classic. Yet he observed Mrs. Fenwick's trembling fingers and the dusting of pink petals on her sleeve. As she left, he pocketed a receipt she dropped time-stamped midnight with the initials CR for urgent reconciliation. Purbright spent the next 2 hours with Miss Checkley, treasurer and keeper of secrets, reviewing petty cash logs and bank stubs already fussed over well past their natural lifespan. The overpayment for artificial daisies had been made on the day when most guild members were at home, with signatures in both blue and black ink. Purbright asked for handwriting samples from Checkley, Gorridge, Fenwick, and Brindle. He drew a silent comparison, noticing subtle curves and distinctive leftward slants. Out in the market, Sergeant Love sought the quieter voices of the flower merchants, the postmistress, and Mr. Pinnock at the hardware shop. Pinnock, hunched over registers, produced a forgotten order slip from 2 weeks before, made in person by someone not local, very exact, and paid in blue pounds, and asked for secrecy. Told me it was for the council's centenary, and I believed them. Love returned, notebook crammed, reports building on one another, all clues pointed at deliberate confusion rather than simple error. Blue daisies appeared where the story needed a twist of pink carnations everywhere someone wished to smooth things over. Midday brought a set-piece interruption. The annual school pageant, rehearsing for their role in the centenary, paraded through the market square with hats adorned supposedly with ribbons in school colours. Instead, dozens wore blue daisies. Every parent found their child's ribbon suspiciously altered, and Mrs. Gorridge, honorary pageant matron, nearly fainted at the sight. Crabtree, seizing opportunity, declared to a startled crowd, "There's sabotage in the sewing committee," who gave out those ribbons. Motherly volunteers stammered denials. The sewing cupboard, upon inspection, had its spools of blue thread replaced with a neat bundle of hymnboard numbers again, blue daisy stamped. Purbright took possession of the evidence, observing the ritual cycle of blame and denial as it washed through the crowd. He asked gentle but pointed questions. Who last gathered sewing supplies? Who distributed ribbons? Was anybody unaccounted for during preparations? Mrs. Butterwick confided that Miss Rosenthal was never at the cupboard. She's too timid. But Brindle he lingered after the rehearsal, always near the keys and lists. Brindle confronted me and protested. I only counted hymn numbers, never touched ribbons. Moseley, seeing a chance for advantage, pressed for a full inquiry into guild supply chains, suspecting now that the sabotage extended even into the town's children, a notion that scandalized and delighted the regulars. Back at the station, Purbright pieced together accounts. The initials CR, he realized, matched not just Crabtree and Rosenthal, but also a retired clerk, Mrs. Catherine Rivet, whose handwriting lingered in old council books. Quiet and nearly invisible, Mrs. Rivet had moved to a cottage at the square's edge. Her council involvement ended years ago. Yet past minutes revealed she was once both guild secretary and town accounts officer, departing after a dispute that was the root, it seemed, of many current slights. Sergeant Love, dispatched to Rivet's home, reported she was out, but neighbours recalled her for her blue-ink ledgers and her fierce love of daisies. One added, "She said the town was addicted to arrangements," vowed a reckoning one day. Purbright wrote into his notebook, "Pattern of disruption, history of grievance, floral signatures, blue-ink currency, sabotage as penance." As dusk crept in, Flaxborough braced itself for whichever aspect of its peace would next be undone. Rosenthal's innocence faded in public memory, suspicion now drifting further afield towards forgotten clerks and handed-down grudges. Purbright, as ever, withheld comment. He let the town's prejudices evolve, knowing, as always, that true motives unravel themselves only when everyone is sure they've put them to rest. Wind worked clumsily along Flaxborough's ginnels that evening, rattling old council windows and stirring papier-mâché daisies that still clung to schoolyard fences from the disrupted pageant. The town felt restless, as if the accumulated tensions of tea-urns and torn flower arrangements had infected every bunting and ledger. Even the cats seemed to linger at doorsteps, wary of odd floral gusts. Inspector Purbright chose the night's calm to revisit the municipal hall, notebook in hand, looking for connections no amount of public thrashing could surface. He walked its rooms with measured steps, glancing at hymnboards still holding traces of blue daisy ink and flower storerooms now locked and doubly inventoried. The scent of old carnations lingered, like quarrels never quite resolved. Sergeant Love, dogged as ever, trailed with polite silence, occasionally stopping to note who had keys to each locked door and how many times volunteers mentioned just popping in for a look. The station phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Butterwick, reporting the mysterious appearance of another pink carnation, this time affixed to the bakery's delivery bicycle. "Not the postman, Inspector. He's afraid of flowers. I'd bet my last scone it's a message, not decoration." Purbright tucked away the alert, unconvinced of the flower's threat, but keen on its directional intent. Next on his route was Mrs. Catherine Rivet's cottage, set discreetly behind an overgrown private hedge. Sergeant Love knocked. No answer, save the flutter of net curtains and the unmistakable click of a ledger closing just inside. "She's in," Love whispers, "and wants to be left so." Purbright opted for patience, noting the blue daisy sticker on the door's glass signature, left for the knowing. Back at council chambers, Moseley had gathered a new faction that was bent on complete audits, old and new. Mrs. Gorridge, defensive, clung to her floral book like a lifebuoy in turbulent waters. Mrs. Fenwick had returned to her old seat, suspicious but silent. Miss Rosenthal, shadowed by exclusion, occupied an uneasy corner, her head bowed and her hands searching for patterns in the rug. Amidst this, Purbright hosted a calmly staged, inquiryless interrogation rather than gentle nudging. He asked who could recall older scandals, particularly those involving faded blue ink and artificial flowers. Mrs. Butterwick volunteered. There was a time Mrs. Rivet nearly lost her committee chair over a missing daisy order. Told the mayor it had been filched by a rival. Next day, every door had a blue ink doodle for good luck or warning, if you asked Brindle. Sergeant Love gathered whispers from the cleaning staff. The evening's pot of tea was served weak, but the gossip strong. Mrs. Rivet, they said, still corresponded with Mr. Pinnock in cryptic, abbreviated notes, always signed with a daisy motif. Crabtree, a background fixture as ever, pressed forward with a torn hymn sheet hastily reassembled. On its margin, a faint penciled CR and the sentence, "Ledgers must reflect the truth of arrangements." Purbright, resisting the lure of easy conclusions, jotted the phrase, "Arrangement ledger struth CR." He had seen the pattern before in the failures of committee trust and the private exiles of those once dominant in guild affairs. The next disruption arrived in classic Flaxborough style. The council's centenary files, waiting for review in the treasurer's office, tumbled with comic precision onto the stairwell, scattering invoices, blue-penciled receipts, and faded pink carnation order forms for all to see. Miss Checkley, mortified, attempted to corral the paperwork, but loose pages fluttered through the corridor, setting off a cascade of helpful hands. Mrs. Gorridge snapped, "If it's sabotage, it's cowardly. If it's honesty, it's unwelcome." Mrs. Fenwick pressed for a full recount of floral disbursements, while Brindle, stooping to sweep up stray slips, muttered about the tyranny of paperwork. This accidental near audit yielded an important clue. Purbright, inspecting the ledger chaos, noticed a pattern in Rivet's old entries. Certain purchases marked first as guild expense, later as council reimbursement, always inked in blue, and frequently coinciding with moments of unrest. Artificial daisies were bought ahead of guild elections. Tea-urn supplies rose on the eve of committee reshuffles. Love, peering over his shoulder, whispered, "Vengeance by ledger, sir?" Purbright mused. "Or a campaign disguised as accountancy?" He retrieved a torn receipt from atop the pile, marked "Arrangement Withdraw." In its corner was a pink, printed carnation, overstamped with a blue daisy, as if flagging up reconciliation only to overwrite it. Outside, the wind lifted someone's flower hat clear off, and the town's last gossips closed shutters with unusual haste. In the hall, Crabtree reappeared, apologizing for trampling a paper daisy into the carpet. The evidence, floral and fiscal, layered into a confusion of intention and outcome. Miss Rosenthal caught Purbright as he prepared to leave. She spoke quietly. "I came to Flaxborough for peace. I wanted my daisies to make things simple, not ugly. Perhaps it's not about flowers at all. Maybe someone wants everyone to look the wrong way." Purbright nodded, content to save conclusions for quieter moments. Returning to the station, he asked Love to compare handwriting samples against council records, particularly those from Rivet's tenure. Love, careful not to betray his suspicion, agreed. "Her hand's clever, but clever enough to hide behind old quarrels?" "We shall see," Purbright replied. The chapter faded with Flaxborough's doors closing against the wind, the ledgers still whispering their cryptic history, and a sense of waiting thick enough to be divided, slice by slice, as the town prepared for whatever blue daisy mischief the morning might bring. Night in Flaxborough brought uneasy sleep to those most invested in guild affairs. The distant clatter of rain on pub awnings and the soft shuffle of feet returning home held the weight of secrets unearthed but not confessed. In the muted light of Municipal Hall, Inspector Purbright reviewed the day's evidence ledgers written in rival hands, blue daisies pressed between, paperwork, carnation motifs stamped over missives, and the silent, persistent presence of Mrs. Catherine Rivet moving at the edge of every transcript. Sergeant Love, red-eyed from comparing signatures against council records into the small hours, appeared with 3 samples, each a probable match to Rivet's careful cursive, but altered by disguised flourishes on the telltale CR monogram. "She's made her own code, sir," Love whispered. "It's as if every entry doubles as a signal warning more than an account." Purbright tipped his chair, considering the logic of the disruption of Rosenthal's exile, Fenwick's indictment, and the town's hush about committee disagreements that went back a decade. The ledgers, it seemed, were as much map as record. If Rivet's grievances found their voice in blue daisies and doctored receipts, the intention must be older than any dropped tray or sabotaged hymnboard. Morning broke with Flaxborough's shop slow to open, wary of further surprise. At the bakery, Mrs. Butterwick confided her final suspicions. "There's a tidy villainy to the blue daisy, Inspector. Whoever's planting them knows that tidiness deceives better than disorder." "And did you hear? Mrs. Rivet didn't sleep in her cottage last night." The neighbour said she was seen headed to the old town library, clutching a sheaf of council files. Moseley, emboldened by public opinion and a sharp new haircut called a council meeting, he insisted the matter had become too public to leave to guild regulation. "We risk municipal scandal," he thundered. "Should this saboteur remain unmasked, let us inspect every council file and every guild minute and demand confession before the week's end." An audience gathered, impatient and eager for drama. Mrs. Fenwick, though wearied by accusation, arrived with a suggestion. "Let us print every suspicious entry. If Mrs. Rivet is behind them, the pattern will show, and if not, let's expect a new round of flowers." She trailed off, aware her own defence sounded like a dare. Purbright, always the observer, let the room settle before acting. As the council combed through bills and correspondence, a sudden commotion rose from the library. Sergeant Love was dispatched with 2 constables. There, amid stacks of unused centenary bunting and piles of ancient council newspapers, Mrs. Rivet stood by an open window, blue ink smudged on her fingers. Before she could slip away, Love addressed her soberly. "Mrs. Rivet, the town wants questions answered. Your hand's all over these." She turned, eyes steady. "I gave the truth where no one wanted it. Ask the guild how many secrets it keeps. Ask the council why carnations cost more with every vote." Love escorted her to Municipal Hall, where the assembled crowd, now silent, now brimming with judgment, formed a semicircle. Purbright addressed Rivet with calm courtesy. "Did you intend the chaos, Mrs. Rivet?" Her answer unfolded slowly, measured by years of slight and stubbornness. "I kept the records, ledgers, receipts, and flower orders. I saw how the guild grew petty and divided. The blue daisies mark every moment the truth was bent, hopes for a reckoning, not a revolution. The carnation, it was always Mrs. Gorridge's symbol of peace, but peace is expensive in Flaxborough." Murmurs rippled. Mrs. Gorridge, shaken, remembered the old rivalry with Rivet, how one argument over tea service turned into a split that lasted longer than anyone cared to admit. Mrs. Fenwick, recalling her own exclusions, found more sympathy than outrage. Moseley, for once subdued, pressed for specifics. Was the sabotage meant for the town, the guild, or just old enemies? Rivet's pause was eloquent. For all. When no one listens, you have to make them see, and they only see what disturbs flowers where flowers don't belong, and notes where trust is absent. Purbright let silence measure the impact. Rosenthal, present but almost forgotten, stepped forward. "I never understood. I only wanted the arrangements to be pretty. No one ever asked me what I thought of the quarrels." Mrs. Rivet quietly apologized. "You became visible only when everyone needed someone fresh to blame." The audience pressed closer, hungry for more public drama. At that exact moment, a third scandal unfolded, a set-piece event worthy of Flaxborough's reputation. The council's master file, always kept in a locked safe, was found wide open. Spilling out in full sight were altered receipts, blue daisy stamped letters, old election releases, and tucked in between, a preserved, dried, fragile pink carnation, unmistakably stamped "Withdraw immediately." It became clear the sabotage was as much personal as public evidence left for the right eyes. Brindle, nearsighted, reported seeing Mrs. Rivet at the town archives late last night. Crabtree insisted, "She's corrected the books, not ruined them." Mrs. Butterwick, ever pragmatic, suggested that at least the truth was now decorated in flowers, regardless of who got the blame. Purbright closed his notebook, considering what remained unsaid. The story of resentment made physical, fabricated notes, blue daisies and symbolic carnation threats. He glanced at Love. The town knows more than it admits. The records were always meant to speak. Love nodded, recognizing that the end of the drama neared, but the final reckoning would demand more than mere discovery. It would require understanding and perhaps forgiveness. Flaxborough's afternoon light dimmed as the public spectacle faded, but the air was charged with anticipation, the last clues exposed, and the council's composure balancing on an edge as fine as any daisy stem. Municipal Hall was the scene of unspoken tension and brittle decorum the morning after Mrs. Rivet's hesitant confession. The council's master file, fanned out across the clerk's desk, lay open for every curious eye. Receipts, flowers, letters, and each scandalous blue daisy pressed between disgruntlement and officialdom. The townsfolk shuffled to and fro, minds cluttered by a mixture of indignation and relief, though few dared admit which feeling held sway. Inspector Purbright arrived early and was greeted with a nod by Brindle, who muttered a reminder about today's centenary tea gathering. "Expect nerves, sir. Butterwick's doubling the cakes in case suspicion turns to hunger." Love, trailing with the calm of a man who'd learned that town mysteries persist longer than any mop, handed Purbright the full set of handwriting analyses. No conclusive match, just the looping possibility of shared grievance given form in ink. By midday, the guild reconvened. Mrs. Gorridge's composure had shifted from brittle to feigned magnanimity. Mrs. Fenwick wore her scepticism openly, a shield against further accusations. Mosley busied himself rewriting the event schedule, crossing out ceremonies and inserting open discussion in a broad, nervous script. Purbright, ever methodical, made his rounds, each visit layered with courtesy and gentle probing. Miss Rosenthal, now restored to guild duties but palpably tense, confessed to dreaming of blue daisies chasing her through paper mazes. Crabtree, self-appointed scribe, whispered that the town's secrets had become a civic inventory. At the tea table, Purbright arranged a small, impromptu test. He set out 3 vases, one packed with pink carnations, one with white daisies, and the third with both, one stem of each clipped. If the company pleases, he requested, might each guest place the flower they favour most in the commons tray. The assembly hesitated, weighing the consequences of selectable blooms. Mrs. Fenwick gripped a carnation. Purbright, ever methodical, made his rounds, each visit layered with courtesy and gentle probing. Miss Rosenthal, now restored to guild duties, but palpably tense, confessed to dreaming of blue daisies chasing her through paper mazes. Crabtree, self-appointed scribe, whispered that the town's secrets had become a civic inventory. At the tea table, Purbright arranged a small, impromptu test. He set out 3 vases, one packed with pink carnations, one with white daisies, and the third with both, one stem of each clipped. If the company pleases, he requested, might each guest place the flower they favour most in the commons tray. The assembly hesitated, weighing the consequences of selectable blooms. Mrs. Fenwick gripped a carnation. Mrs. Gorridge, against her habits, chose a daisy, hands trembling with effort. Mrs. Rivet, newly returned from the library, stepped forward last. She hung back as others debated, and finally placed a clipped carnation and a blue daisy-stamped note in the tray, leaning toward Purbright with a whisper. "Let intention speak before resentment shouts, Inspector." Her habits chose a daisy, hands trembling with effort. Mrs. Rivet, newly returned from the library, stepped forward last. She hung back as others debated and, finally, placed a clipped carnation and a blue daisy-stamped note in the tray, leaning toward Purbright with a whisper. "Let intention speak before resentment shouts, Inspector." The routine test shook shallow allegiances. Mrs. Butterwick muttered, "If flowers decide peace, let's hope for an endless supply." Moseley tallied results, reporting the daisies outnumbered carnations, a break from tradition, and a sign the town hungered for change, whatever its cost. As the committee dispersed for afternoon errands, Purbright watched them closely, not for guilt, but for the recoil from old patterns. Mrs. Gorridge lingered near the urn, arranging ribbons with extra precision before departing with a half-uttered apology to Mrs. Fenwick. Miss Rosenthal, still nervous, faced her accusers with tentative gratitude. Brindle swept crumbs in circles, humming "Abide with me" under his breath. Out in the square, Purbright found Mrs. Rivet alone on a bench, shadowed by the council notice board. He offered no accusation, only reflection. "Did any part of this please you, Mrs. Rivet?" She shook her head, her reply as measured as each entry in her ledgers. "No, Inspector. But when truth is exiled, a town suffers more than a clerk ever could." The tea-urn's tap leaked one last precise drop onto the scuffed floor, drawing a final moment of attention. Purbright knelt, examining the now faded carnation slip found on the first day. The ink had blurred, and the word "withdrawn" was barely legible. He pocketed the clue, certain its significance would outlast scandal. Preparations for the evening's centenary dinner began with Mrs. Butterwick declaring war on stale biscuits, and Rosenthal quietly arranging the daisies anew. The hall, flush with anticipation, and the perfume of blended blooms, waited for its final accounting. Purbright lingered near the doorway, greeting each arrival with bespoke warmth and a barely perceptible watchfulness. As dusk settled, he staged one last deliberate comment directed quietly at Crabtree, and audible enough for the assembly. Sometimes the responsible party is the one most eager to write the story they wish remembered. Crabtree stilled, fingers pressed to a hymn sheet. Mrs. Rivet met the inspector's glance, a fleeting smile hinting at understanding and regret. Love took notes and conflict softened. Rosenthal was reinstated. Rivet's intent revealed ledgers and flowers used as tools. Old wounds surfaced, and new peace whispered. Outside, the town's lights blinked on as if in apology, illuminating windows behind which gossip built anew. Flaxborough's peace, purchased with discomfort and confrontation, strayed into every cup poured that night and lingered quietly in each arrangement, as Purbright waited for the moment fit for reckoning. The evening of the centenary dinner arrived with a hush that felt earned, heavy with expectation and memory. Flaxborough's municipal hall glowed with the polished warmth reserved for special occasions, and for a moment the scandal of tea-urns, flowers, and blue daisies was edged gently to the margins. Tables were dressed in neutral truce daisies, and carnations arranged together in modest, alternating bunches. No tray bore a solitary bloom. Conversation, once brittle and defensive, had softened into cautious civility. Inspector Purbright took his place near the window, notebook closed, gaze attentive and unwavering. Sergeant Love was stationed by the refreshments in optimistic anticipation, a bulwark against any unforeseen disaster. Guests arrived in steady streams, Mrs. Gorridge in pale pink, Mrs. Fenwick bearing a fresh carnation, and Moseley with a sheaf of council minutes folded defensively. Mrs. Rivet entered quietly, unaccompanied, pausing at the doorway before joining the crowd. The formal dinner proceeded with restrained cheer, speeches touching elegantly upon Flaxborough's resilient history, but carefully avoiding mention of botched flower shows or unexplained leaks. Mrs. Butterwick handled the pudding with conviction. Miss Rosenthal poured tea, her hands steadier than the first time Purbright had observed them. Crabtree, delicately eager, circulated with the hymn sheets, none of which bore anything more distinctive than a neatly sketched border. After the last spoonful of syllabub and the briefest shuffle of chairs, Purbright rose for what was considered in Flaxborough the inspector's summing up, a tradition as much admired for its brevity as for its knack of making the guilty party squirm in polite company. He waited for the room's soft lull, and then spoke in measured, unhurried tones. Over the last week, the Municipal Hall has hosted more than the centenary celebrations. Our arrangements of both flowers and people have been repeatedly tested. Each event, each confusion, each little bloom out of place has served a purpose. It is tempting, as always, to believe the culprit lies plainly among us, a newcomer, a rival, or a clerk nursing old grudges. In truth, the blue daisies were signals, not weapons, and the altered ledgers were attempts at truth, not mere sabotage. Mrs. Rivet's campaign arose from years of oversight and the bitter taste of being unheard. Her methods unsettled us, but they never destroyed us. She used old patterns to warn us, to push every party to a reckoning with what was long ignored. Miss Rosenthal, cast as the villain, was simply too quiet and earnest for sabotage. Mrs. Gorridge, fiercely loyal to tradition, missed the cost of public peace and private exclusion. Mrs. Fenwick, ever pragmatic, did not realize how easily assumptions become convictions. If there was harm, it came from forgetting that every town, however small, is made up of its secrets, its reconciliations, and its willingness to acknowledge old wounds. The flowers, the trays, and the ledgers were lessons in perspective, as much about forgiveness as correction. As Purbright's words lingered, Mrs. Rivet rose. Flaxborough was always a place for careful arrangement. Inspector, perhaps now the arrangements of our committees and our grievances might suit better? There was no applause, but the silence was appreciative. Moseley, fidgeting with his notes, ventured a joke about next year's flower order. Mrs. Gorridge placed a carnation beside a daisy in Rosenthal's lap, and after a moment clasped her hand. Brindle, satisfied, chalked today's hymn board. No anagrams, no secrets, just plain sanctuary. The crowd dispersed slowly, townsfolk exchanging soft glances that spoke of relief, humility, and the hope that future tea would be poured without commentary. Mrs. Butterwick locked away the council biscuit tin with uncharacteristic levity. Miss Checkley tallied receipts with a look of cautious optimism. Inspector Purbright walked the quiet square afterward, reflecting on the persistent optimism of small places, the durability of courtesy, and the peculiar ways old feuds find their peace, not in sweeping confessions but in modest gestures, in the arrangement of flowers neither victorious nor vanquished. Finally Purbright paused beneath Flaxborough's ancient clock tower, beneath which the whole affair had first begun. The market square was still. The hymn "Abide with me" drifted from an open window above, and so the town exhaled slowly, ready to resume its routines, altered by truth, reaffirmed by reconciliation.